Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again, a very warm welcome once again to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan. My name is Peter Langen. I'm a correspondent at Asia Times and your MC for today. If I could just ask housekeeping, if anyone has mobile phones, which I'm sure most of you do, could you please mute or turn them off, please, at this point. It's good to see everyone here, despite the big jolt we received this morning from the earthquake. That, of course, allows me to segue into an earthquake of a different type in global politics with the election of billionaire businessman Mr. Donald Trump as the next president of the United States of America. So we are very fortunate today to have a speaker who actually really doesn't need an introduction. He's spoken here many times. He's a long-time commentator on Japan and its political world. He is the Burgess Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Columbia University, and he's here to speak to us today about recent events in global politics and their implications for Japan. So if I could ask you to again give a very warm welcome to Mr. Gerald Curtis. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be back here to speak at the FCC, Jay. Each time I do, I get a year's free membership. So this timing could not have been better. Although the subject at hand is not a very happy one from my point of view. Is to talk about Donald Trump's victory and how it has left Japan and the whole world stunned and uncertain about where the U.S. is going. And uncertainty itself is a major source of instability and of concern, and we're seeing a reaction to this uncertainty already. And we're seeing it here in Japan in the Abe administration, and I'll come back and talk about that in a few minutes. We don't yet know who Trump will choose as a Secretary of State. We don't know how much of what he said in the campaign about Japan or about Asia or about anything else he'll actually try to implement. We don't know what advice he's going to be getting from his national security team and his international economics advisors, or whether he'll listen to them. Asia had more than enough uncertainties without Trump, but he has compounded them in the most profound way. Japanese political leaders, Abe and the Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga and others, are publicly expressing cautious optimism that Trump will prove to be realistic and pragmatic and back away from a lot of promises he's made during the campaign. But they, like people everywhere else in the world, I think are deeply worried. And as I said at the opening, just uncertain as to what Trump is going to do. I do want to say a few words about the election results and the situation in my country before getting into the Japan issue. I think we kid ourselves if we try to sugarcoat the disastrous situation we find ourselves in the United States. We've elected as president a man whose campaign was built on demagoguery and on intolerance. Our society is deeply divided, not only over policy issues, but over fundamental values, where increasingly people on one side of the divide show little respect for those on the other. And this goes for people who oppose Trump as much as it does for those who supported him. You know, if the Trump supporters had taken to the streets after the election and said, she's not our president, and protested the results of a freely contested election, everybody would have accused them of basically being fascists. But when it happens on the other side of the divide, on the liberal side of the divide, somehow the problem is Trump. Not this kind of the childish attitudes of college students. The day after the election, You know, I was up 3 o'clock in the morning. Trump made his victory statement. A lot of people stayed up at night. They woke up early in the morning and went to work. But students at Columbia and Yale, they asked their teachers to please postpone the midterm exams or cancel class because they wanted to stay home and cry for the day and catch up on the sleep. This is ridiculous, but let me not go there. So, you know, can't deny it. Trump's campaign reeked of bigotry and intolerance, but that's not why he won. He won, and others have made this point, but I think it's worth underscoring. He won because he tapped into a deep vein of anger and fear in the body politic that the Washington political and the media elite simply did not understand. I think at the end of the day, many people simply closed their ears to the awful things he said and listened only to his promise to stick it to the establishment. When asked what qualities in a leader matters the most, 4 in 10 people responding in an exit poll reported in the Wall Street Journal chose as the answer the ability to bring about change. 80% of them supported Trump. How Trump is going to govern with how he's going to govern so as to satisfy his populist base, the mainstream Republicans, and the right-wing, so-called alt-right people that are going to be in the administration, we're yet to see. Finally, on the domestic side, I am distraught over the Democratic Party's leadership's reaction to this election. They're in a state of denial about the crisis the Democratic Party faces. Hillary Clinton blames the FBI director for her defeat. Party leaders argue that, well, Americans aren't really ready yet, still are resisting the idea of having a woman as president. They even blame unfair media coverage, though the media was much more unfair to Trump than it was to Hillary. I think, you know, Hillary Clinton spent a lot of time hobnobbing with rich friends in Southampton and elsewhere, raising money to use for TV commercials that were almost entirely about why people should not vote for Trump, and almost nothing about why they should vote for her. And holding events in the closing days of their campaign with Beyoncé and other celebrities, for people out in the Midwest or elsewhere in the country, it only reinforced the message that she lives in a world that most people can never hope to experience and enjoys being there rather than spending time in the working class, Rust Belt communities that used to be the backbone of the Democratic Party. I think, and this point too, just in the last week has been made by several commentators, including a colleague of mine at Columbia writing in the New York Times, I think 2 days ago. This emphasis on identity politics by the Democratic Party is having the perverse effect of contributing to dividing rather than uniting our country. Too many in this liberal elite seem to believe there's a trade-off between support of white working class people and minorities, and that demography is on their side. But it's going to be the middle of the century before the white population is less than 50%, and there's no reason to believe that non-white voters necessarily will support the Democrats. You know, in this election, 29% of Hispanics, 29% of Hispanic voters, and even 8% of African Americans voted for Trump, which was slightly more than either group voted for Romney against Obama 4 years ago. So the irony here is that a lot of people thought Trump's victory would leave the Republican Party in shambles, since he essentially hijacked the party for his own personal purposes. But I think the Democratic Party is in far more perilous situation. Now, as to foreign policy. Problem of talking about Trump's foreign policy here today is that nobody has any idea what it's going to be. And if anybody tells you that they know what Trump is going to do about anything, don't believe them. That's my message. We don't know. Will he try to make nice with Putin? Will he initiate a trade war, declare China a currency manipulator and initiate a trade war with China? Will he fundamentally change America's immigration policies or walk away from our alliances? We don't know. So we have to hope he surrounds himself with some sensible people and that he proves to be more pragmatic and realistic than he has been so far. So I think, you know, this is a man, as far as we can tell, without any apparent core principles, a narcissist whose goal is to bask in the limelight and be applauded for his success. Well, maybe that's his saving grace. He himself has said that what he needed to do to win the election is different than what he needs to do to be a successful president. So let's hope he understands that what he needs to do to be a successful president is not unraveling the international world order. One other point I want to mention before getting into the U.S.-Japan relations and East Asian issues. Trump has already done enormous damage to the American image abroad, to our so-called soft power, including here in Japan. The other night I gave a speech, and in the Q&A, a young man raised his hand and said, I was thinking of going to study in the United States. Is it safe for me to go? A good friend of mine, a former very senior official in the foreign ministry, whose daughter is living in New York, told me yesterday morning, the daughter called, and she and her friends, other Japanese in the States, were talking on the phone, that they're worried whether there's going to be discrimination against Asians, including Japanese in New York. And we see these hate crimes already occurring. And what's especially troubling and infuriating is that Trump, when asked, refused to say that the incarceration of Japanese Americans during the Second World War was a mistake. He refused to say it, and now people in the Trump leadership are saying that the incarceration of Japanese Americans provides a useful precedent for having having a registry of Muslims in the United States. They're not saying they're going to incarcerate them, but they're using this one of the most shameful episodes in American history as a precedent for the way that we should deal with Muslims. Okay, I've got all that off my chest. Let me move on. So, a few days before the November 8th, a few days before the presidential election, instruction went out to the embassy, Japanese embassy in Washington, to contact the Trump people and say that if he were to win, Prime Minister Abe would like to call him right away to congratulate him. Apparently, when told this, Trump was absolutely delighted. As someone in a position to know said he was, "Eirai yorokonda." Absolutely delighted that the Japanese thought that he's going to win the election. He probably didn't even think it himself. So they had that phone conversation. And in the phone conversation, and this had not been prepared on either side, Abe said that he's going to be going to Lima, Peru, and dropping by New York on his way, and he'd be happy to come say hello if Trump had the time. And according to one report, Trump's response was, "Wow, that would be awesome. Please come ahead." So they had this meeting. We don't know what they talked about. The Japanese say, Japanese leaders I've spoken to, who are people who are in a position, though, say that they didn't really talk about anything of real substance. It was a get to know you, casual, friendly conversation with his daughter, Trump's daughter, and her husband, Ivanka, and her husband there. So we don't know. We don't know whether this is a spin, that they did talk about things which they're not reporting. But I tend to believe that it's probably true. Although the meeting, was scheduled for 45 minutes, it went on for 90. So you can talk about golf for only so long. So I think, so my sense is that they did have some conversation, but we don't know what. But I tell you, we know what they didn't talk about. We know what Trump did not talk about, and it's very important. He did not talk about withdrawing U.S. troops unless the Japanese coughed up a lot of money to pay for their presence in Japan and to do more for the alliance. Because if he had said that, there is no way in the world that Trump would have come out of Trump Tower and said, "This is a man I can trust. This is a relationship I feel confident about." There is no way he would have said that. It's very important that Trump did not say anything that got Abe upset. It was all how important the alliance is and so on, which is what I had expected to happen, but it is. In any case, so Abe came out of that meeting saying that Trump is a leader we can trust, which was rather an over-the-top compliment that seems premature at best. But as I said, it indicates what was not said in that meeting. It wasn't. Before Abe left for Washington, there was actually a reception for a group that I was a member of, where he gave, where he spoke, and he said, and I think this, I'm pretty certain this is what he did, that he was going to go to Washington and he was going to explain Japan's basic stance, its commitment to TPP and free trade, its belief that the alliance serves the interests of both countries equally, that it's as important for the U.S. as it is for Japan, and so forth and so on. In short, there's a big change here. Abe went to New York to tell Trump where Japan stands, not to ask him where he wants Japan to stand. There's a big change in the kind of the atmospherics of the way in which the relationship is managed. In the past, when we've gotten a new president, the Japanese prime minister got on an airplane and flew to Washington to meet him. This is the first time that he flew to meet him before he even became president. And with some kind of omiyage, some present in the form of something that the Americans wanted from Japan, they're going to get. Abe went with a real omiyage. He brought him a very expensive golf club, a driver. But nothing about offering Trump something on the relationship that Trump asked for in the campaign. This is not the way this relationship is managed any longer. As far as the bilateral U.S.-Japan relationship, sort of narrowly defined bilateral relationship, I'm quite optimistic or quite confident there's not going to be any big clash. There'll be pressure on Japan. No question, there will be pressure on Japan to spend more on defense. And there would have been pressure on Japan to spend more on defense if Hillary Clinton had been elected president as well. And I don't think it's going to be so much to increase support for the U.S. presence in Japan, because Japan already pays about 75% of U.S. base costs compared to about 30 to 40% for South Korea or for Germany. But pressure on Japan to do more to strengthen its own military capabilities. That fits in perfectly with Abe's own aspirations. And now he can use, in a way, skillfully use American pressure to provide additional justification for doing what he wants to do anyway. So I don't think we're going to, not going to see a huge increase in the Japanese defense budget. But you'll see a bigger increase in the coming years than what I would have expected earlier. I think on the security relationship, Japanese are pretty confident. Michael Flynn, will be the new National Security Advisor, was here last month, met with Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga, reassured him that there's no change in U.S. security policy vis-a-vis Japan. And I think that is true. Even if Trump wanted to make big changes, institutions in our country, at least some of the institutions, and the checks and balances in our system still operate. We'll have to see how strong they really are. But one institution that's really strong in the United States is the Pentagon. And the idea that the Pentagon would simply sit on its hands while Trump unraveled the U.S. security relationship is inconceivable. It won't happen. So I think, there'll be some tough negotiations between the U.S. and Japan about how much more Japan does, what it does. But that's not a new story. That's the history of post-war U.S.-Japan negotiations over security issues. I think it's perfectly manageable. Similarly, I think it's a similar story on sort of bilateral economic relations. We're not going to return to the economic disputes of the 1980s, although listening to Trump during the campaign, it sounded as though his mental image of the Japanese economy was frozen in what it was in the 1980s. But a lot has changed, including a lot of Japanese companies investing a huge amount of money in factories, plants, and equipment in the United States. Toyota, for example, has manufacturing facilities in 9 states. It's in cumulative investments over $21 billion. And almost all of those states, the great majority of those states, have Republican governors and Republican senators and congressmen. Who's going to be banging on Vice President Pence's door, by the way, who comes from Indiana, which has Honda, Toyota, and Subaru plants? They're going to be the ones banging on the door. Don't undercut, don't weaken our relationships with Japan. So it's a very different age, a very different time from the 1980s. The issues are not the bilateral relationship. What I've told my friends in the Japanese media is stop, especially on TV, but in the print media too, stop focusing so much on Nichibei Kanke, this bilateral relationship, and focus more on what it means for Japan, what Trump does in the region and in the world, and what are the options that Japan faces to deal with it. Because here is where the problems are. The problems are the impact of Trump's foreign policies on this region and on each of the countries in it, including, of course, Japan. TPP. Abe is firm in his support of TPP. It was ratified by the lower house, I think it was November 10th, which means it'll come into effect 30 days later if the upper house doesn't pass it, and the upper house probably will. I think last week I was giving speeches here, and I said, I was giving a lot of speeches in Japanese in which, TPP was zettai ni arenai. This week I've been giving speeches and I decided to drop the word zettai ni. It's not clear that it's absolutely out of the question that the U.S. might support TPP. Abe has the hope that the Republican Congress, the Republican leadership, will turn Trump around. Probably requires some kind of face-saving concessions in terms, not of in rewriting the treaty, but in implementation clauses to give Trump something that he can claim to be a victory. So there's some hope, I think of this slim hope, but some slim hope that the American view will turn around. Because probably the majority of Republicans in the Senate and in the House favor TPP. Trump opposes it, and I would suspect that, and I've heard that Vice President-elect Pence is a free trader and also likely in that pro-TPP camp. So what we're seeing in Lima is very interesting in that Abe has not risen to the opportunity to say, let's get the other members of TPP, the other 11 of us, to change the ratification clause so that we can have TPP with the U.S., or at least some of the countries that want to have a TPP type agreement. Why don't we do that? No. He's talking about the importance of TPP and free trade, saying it's probably dead unless the Americans change their mind, waiting to see what the U.S. does. But I think the upshot of this is that if Trump sticks to his position that the U.S. is out of TPP, Abe will try to position himself as the leader of a free trade, of building a new free trade regime in East Asia. And you will see Japan playing a leadership role in trying to expand TPP to include what's called the RCEP, this regional comprehensive economic partnership idea. China and it's ASEAN and the rest of East Asia and some Pacific nations in a free trade pact. So the upshot of Trump shifting America to a more protectionist policy is not that Japan follows him, but that Japan leads the opposition to that movement. And if Trump takes this protectionist line, and if he declares China to be a currency manipulator and imposes tariffs, what will be the result? It'll be twofold. The Chinese will not come running to him and say, "Oh my goodness, what can we do to improve the situation?" They will retaliate. And the second thing is that if there's a U.S.-China economic war, it's not a war between the U.S. and China. It's a war between the U.S. and every country in East Asia because of supply chains and other interrelationships. All the economies in this region, including Japan's, are very much integrated with the Chinese economy. You cannot punish the Chinese without punishing Japanese companies that provide the high-end components that go into products that are exported from China to the United States. And I think we're seeing already, just in the last week, talk and actually efforts by Japan to kind of improve its relationships with China. And we hear that the Chinese have been taking a much more reasonable stance towards Japan. Because the Chinese, I think what will happen, the Chinese will not try to exploit Trump's protectionist, anti-Chinese views as a way to drive to put more pressure on Japan. No, it'll try to draw Japan away from the U.S. and to some extent, it might well be successful. Abe met with Xi Jinping in Lima yesterday. They both came out saying they're looking for an improvement in the relations. I think it's for real. And I think we have to look very carefully at how Japan tries to play this two-sided, two-edged sword game of, one, building up its own military capabilities and maintaining a strong U.S. alliance to balance China, and at the same time seeking to engage with and improve its bilateral economic and political relations with China. And the point I'm trying to underscore here is that this is not part of a joint U.S.-Japan approach to the region. It's part of an approach that assumes that it will not be a coordinated or necessary complementary approach to the region between the U.S. and Japan. In short, I think it accelerates a process of greater Japanese autonomy in its security policy and its foreign relations. On Russia, I'll try to keep this. I'll summarize quickly, so we have it's like we leave time for your questions. On Russian relations. Right now, the Japanese are trying very hard to dampen expectations in this country that anything of much significance is going to come out of the Putin visit to Yamaguchi next month. And there are two possible reasons, of course, why they're trying to dampen expectations. One is they don't expect much to come out of the meeting next month. And the second is that they want to get as much bang for the buck as possible, to get as much credit for whatever does come out of that meeting. The line that I get from the Kante is that Japan-Russian relations over the Northern Islands issue is at the starting line. It's at the starting gate. It's not near the finishing line. And I think that's probably, I think it's more than at the starting gate, but it'll be a while. It's not going to happen right away that there's going to be an agreement on the Northern Islands. But Putin has essentially said this is an issue that's open to negotiations. He's taken a very tough line, but it's open to negotiations. And Abe's approach is to try to try to strengthen economic relations, use Russia as a further way to maintain a balance in Asia, which means balancing against China, and try to find a way to reach some accord on the Northern Islands. So I don't think we'll see any major result next month, but progress. And I think here, Abe probably is much more confident that he's not going to get any pushback from the United States on his Russian initiative, since Trump himself has talked about wanting to improve relations with Putin, different than would have been the case had Hillary Clinton been elected. So, you know, as we're saying, no one has any idea what Trump's foreign policy will be. And Japanese are in a watch and wait mode. But what I think is clear is that Trump's talk of protectionism and the threat to walk away from alliances is only strengthening Japan's resolve to broaden its security relationships with other countries, pose as the champion of free trade, develop relations with Russia to sustain a balance of power in East Asia, try to improve its relationships with China, and maintain the alliance, but not put all its eggs in the U.S. alliance basket by any means. If Trump is true to his words during the campaign, he will accelerate the collapse of the international order as we've known it since the end of the Second World War. True, it's been unraveling anyway. The end of the Cold War, the end of bipolarity, the emergence of this uncertain, fluid, multipolar world here in East Asia and around the world. Yes, it's all leading to a fundamental change in the structure of international politics. But if Hillary Clinton had become president, you could have expected that the U.S. would play a major leadership role in trying to restructure, or trying to design the architecture. Can't do it alone, but would have played the leading role in designing the architecture for the world order that needs to emerge here and in the world. But with Trump, we have a president who's simply destroying the international order without having a clue as to what should replace it. So this is, in every sense, a very worrisome thing. Finally, although it's not actually directly related to what we're talking about, I wanted to say a word about constitutional revision in Japan. I think what's going on with the U.S. and international security surely will encourage more thought about revising Article 9 and so on, but that's not going to happen right away. The strategy of the Abe people and of the LDP is to try, and you know, there's a commission in the Diet now that's looking at what trying to come up with a consensus view on what to do about revision. It's clear the strategy is to try to find issues where a broad consensus can be achieved, whether it be including adding a clause about environmental protection being a human right. There are lots of kind of nice issues that nobody really opposes that are being put forward. And the goal, I believe, is to get agreement on revising one or two or few provisions of the Constitution next year, 2017, and have a public referendum before the LDP presidential election in 2018. The goal being, if you can get the voters to support revising the Constitution, no matter how innocuous the particular clause is, you've broken the taboo about constitutional revision. And then you move on in Abe's third term. He's going to be in office after Trump is gone. He'll be in office until 2021, the way things look right now. Use that third term to push for the substantive changes in the preamble, in Article 9, and other things that Abe and the LDP want. So, to conclude, I think we're going to, and we already have seen Trump back away from some of the things he said in the campaign. He won't threaten to abrogate the security treaty or raise the possibility of Japan developing nuclear weapons and so forth and so on. But effective management of our alliance and the managing this changing situation in East Asia has been made much more difficult and much more uncertain by the emergence, our choice in the United States as president, someone who has very little knowledge about international affairs, and is not informed about most of the issues that are of concern to those concerned about U.S. policy in Asia, and we have to figure out how to live with that and to survive it. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor Curtis. We'll now open the floor to questions. We'll have them from the working press tables first, please. If you can come and introduce yourself and your agency. And if we have time, I can open it to the floor. Jonathan.
Thanks very much. Jonathan Sobel from the New York Times. You mentioned some reassuring things that Trump and his team have said or avoided saying with regard to the security relationship that might make Japan more confident that under President Trump, the U.S. will continue to guarantee Japan's security. As before, you mentioned also the economic side of Japan-China relations, and what you say is maybe the beginning of a kind of rapprochement. You said it's for real. Do you think then that China will not use a Trump presidency as a reason to test the boundaries of the U.S. security guarantee, for example, by making moves around the Senkaku Islands, which would work against that economic rapprochement? And if it does, how do you expect a Trump-led United States to respond? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I don't expect the Chinese to test the U.S. on the Senkakus. My sense is that right now, the Chinese, first of all, they're concerned about their own economic situation, and so the Japanese economic relationship looms pretty large, and I think they have kind of a healthy respect for the Pentagon and its determination not to let China push us around, and they would see, a ratcheting up of pressure on the Senkaku as intending to do just that, to test us. And if we thought that we were being tested, we would respond to show the Chinese that it's not a good idea to test us. So I don't think more to the point, I don't think the Japanese government is worried that China will test us over the Senkakus and that Trump will not respond. So yeah, I think, well, that's the answer to the question, Jonathan.
Any other questions from the press? Yes, sir.
My name is Kimura. I am just a former Asahi reporter. Thank you very much for Professor Curtis for your fruitful presentation. And it is said that President-elect Donald Trump will be in a rapport with the Putin, Vladimir Putin in Russia. And also that there is a growing speculation that, based on the personal relationships and that very current abrasive relationship between the two countries, I mean the United States and Russia, could be very, very changeable. So, and also would lead to the very fundamental and realignment of the power in the international arena. Although it might be a very hypothetical question, but if so, what does that mean for the Mr. Abe, who really want to strongly just to resolve the very long-standing territorial issues, as you mentioned, over the Northern Ireland issues. And the situation seems to be much more intricate. Abe-san will not be able to monopolize his very unique position and based on his friendship, between the personal friendship with Putin. What would you react on that issue? Thank you.
Thanks, Kimura. So that's a really great question. So, and there are two parts to it. First is the prospect of the Trump administration, of Trump, really improving relations with Putin and with Russia. He may try, but we've already heard from people like John McCain and others in the Republican Party warning Trump not to be taken in by the Russians, by this KGB former operative, and saying that they will oppose Trump if he tries to do so. So how far Trump goes and how quickly he tries to go in improving relations with Putin when the evidence of Russian using Russian intelligence providing hacking the Democratic National Committee and so on, and trying to influence the election. It's not clear how quickly or how far Trump will go. The pattern we've seen is that he's walked back so many things that he stated so forcefully during the campaign, and he may walk back the Putin thing. But if he doesn't, let's assume that it goes forward, then the point that Kimura-san raises is really important. What does it mean for Abe? And it can mean one of two things. What you imply is that if there's a real improvement in U.S.-Russian relations, Putin has much less need to be nice to Abe because he got the Americans. The reason to be nice to Abe was because the Americans were not being nice to him, and he was trying to find a way to drive a wedge between the U.S. and Japan. So this pulls the rug out from under Abe in terms of the leverage he has vis-a-vis Putin. I think that's the implicit point you were trying to make. But there is another possibility, which is that Abe, Putin, and Trump become kind of a triumvirate that see things very much the same way, and that kind of get along well with each other. So, Abe is in a very interesting and important position. Among American allies, what other leader has not criticized Trump and is very well informed on international affairs? It's only Abe. Merkel? No, she came out saying, how we deal with Trump depends on his commitment to values, universal values, and so forth and so on. So Abe is in a position to be kind of, to sort of, he can, I don't know if he did it when they were sitting in Trump Tower, but at some point he'll say, he's met with Putin more than a dozen times since becoming prime minister. They're on a first name basis. He calls him Vladimir when he, in the meeting in Vladivostok. He's coming to his hometown. He can help Trump deal with Putin and improve relations. So I don't dismiss that as a real possibility, and I think that's what Abe is looking for. He's looking for an opportunity to be a leader in the international scene and sort of helping Trump understand what needs to be done.
Any other questions? Yeah, William?
William Sposato, freelance. Mr. Putin seems to have done a very good job of putting himself back on the world stage, even though Russia's long-term economic fundamentals continue to weaken. And his country economically is shrinking. He's got huge problems at home. I'm wondering, how important is this Russia relationship with Japan? It's talked about a lot, but is it just him sort of managing to get on the global stage, using force of personality, and is it overplaying really the role that Russia should have?
Well, I think the Russian-Japanese discussion about economic cooperation is really important for the Russians. It's important for the Japanese too, but it's especially important for Russia if Japanese trading companies invest more in the Russian Far East and so on. So I think Putin sees two things. He sees this Japanese economic, Japan's a big economy after all, and it can make a significant contribution to a Russia that surely needs a lot of economic help. There was a second point I just had in my head, and it went somewhere, so I'll come back to it. So I think I wouldn't overplay it, but it's important. Oh, and the other point was that in Lima, Putin was complaining about the decline in Russo-Japanese trade this past year, and attributing it, which is not wrong, attributing it to Japan's continuing support for the sanctions against Russia because of Ukraine. So clearly one reason this is so important to Putin, he wants to try to get the Japanese to break out from the sanctions regime. So yeah, I wouldn't overstate it, but I think it's important. And for Abe, it's important mainly if it can result in a settlement of the Northern Islands issue. That's the goal, and I think it's quite evident that Abe has given up any hope of getting the return of all 4 islands. So it's a question he can get to, and then what else? And that's what the negotiation is going on about, and it will take some time, and so you won't get a peace treaty until a deal is struck. But I think there's 2 things about these 2 leaders. Putin is probably the only leader Russia has had or will have for years, for as far as we can see, who's capable of giving up territory and getting away with it in terms of domestic Russian opinion. And Abe is the only prime minister of Japan that one can imagine in Japan who's capable of settling for less than the return of all 4 islands. So you put these 2 together and you have the possibility of a deal.
Can I ask a question? You mentioned that Mr. Abe went to New York with his driver for Mr. Trump, but Japan went there not to say, well, what does the US want? But this is where Japan stands, and you mentioned that the atmospherics have changed. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how that plays out practically for Japan? Is it an unshackling of Japan and what it does next?
I think so. I think what it, put it simply, what it means is that Abe wants to get across the message that this alliance is no longer one in which the U.S. says this is what we want us to do together, meaning we'll make the decisions and then let's talk about how much of the burden you're going to carry. It's now an alliance in which we're going to have our own views and not be shy about expressing them, and the U.S. will have to respond. it's difficult to pull this off because, after all, the Japanese are dependent on the on the U.S. alliance, but we're dependent on the alliance as well. But so that's what so that's what it's about. I think what worries me, it worried me about Clinton, and it worries me in a different way about Trump. My worry about Hillary Clinton and her pivot to Asia policy was that I didn't get the sense she really, and her people, her Asia specialists, really understand how much the dynamic of this alliance has changed as a result of this emergence of a multipolar world, Japan developing security relationships with other countries, a growing lack of willingness to wait for to have the Americans tell us what to do and then respond. So the management of the alliance has to change. It would have had to change under Hillary Clinton as well. But at least with Clinton, you would have had people who know what they were talking about when dealing with Asia, and that we don't have with Trump. So, you know, the story is very simple. What we're seeing is a Japan that still feels that alliance with the United States is absolutely critical for Japanese security, but that Japan is going to play a larger role in deciding not only in doing more, but in deciding what it is more that needs to be done.
I can, sir, yes. And the floor is open now to anyone else who may have questions. We have a few minutes left.
My name is Hiroyuki Fujita, freelance, and known as ultra right-wing journalist among the Tokyo correspondents. I myself don't think so. But of course, you know, Japan-U.S. security pact is very important. Alliance is okay. However, what Trump said during the campaign, you know, Japan should defend herself. I think it's a very important message for us, right-wing as well as ultra left-wing people. Do we need U.S. bases forever to defend our own country? Should we keep U.S. bases forever to live happily on this land? Is it a mandatory? Is a nothing else can happen in the future? Like less bases, U.S. bases in Japan, or no more U.S. bases in Japan. Someday in the future, maybe 100 years, 200 years, 300 years later.
Okay. Well, if it's 100 years later, I'm not going to worry about it. But it may not be that far away. So first, a couple of things. Trump never said that Japan should defend itself. Trump's problem is he said Japan should pay us to defend them. That turns us into what, a mercenary army? We're not in Japan because we're being nice to the Japanese. We're in Japan because defending Japan is important for the defense of the United States. Once the United States concludes, if the United States will conclude that defending Japan was not relevant to the security of the U.S., you think that the Japanese could spend enough money to convince the Americans to stay? Not of any way in the world. We'll be out of here in no time. The point is that we cannot imagine the future anytime in, I don't know about 100 years, but in the next 20, 30 years at least, we cannot imagine a future, and I don't think the Japanese can imagine a future in which there could be peace and stability in East Asia without a U.S.-Japan alliance. And I think what has changed the calculus, including among right-wing Japanese that I know and whose stuff I read, is that it has changed the right wing's attitude about the United States, in that there's always been, on the sort of right side of the LDP, an implicit anti-Americanism in the emphasis on Japan becoming more self-sufficient. Because the point of Japan doing more was to get out of this humiliating position of being subservient to the United States. There's always been a very strong element on the right as well as on the left. But China has changed the calculus. Because thinking people on the right, pretty far on the right in the LDP, or in this constellation of Japanese ideas, thinking, even people pretty far on the right say there is no way that Japan can defend itself against an ever increasingly strong China without alliance with the United States. So I think we've seen in the last years growing support, a broadening of support for the alliance, both sort of across the left, to the more left side of the spectrum, but especially to the right side of the spectrum. So there may be, and there should be ways to streamline the U.S. presence. I think we have an over-presence in Okinawa. It's still treated as kind of an American military protectorate. 75% of all our bases are there. What is it, 20% of the arable land of Okinawa is occupied by American bases? Doesn't make any sense any longer, especially now that they're like, Kadena is like a sitting duck, susceptible to missile attacks from the Chinese. Having such a concentration of American military forces in one place militarily doesn't make sense. And so there's a lot of thinking at the Pentagon about how to disperse our forces in Asia. Well, we should, and we should disperse them out of Okinawa, in my view. So there are lots of things that reasonable planners can think about in terms of streamlining the presence. But I can't imagine a world in which there's no U.S. military presence in Japan that the Japanese would want to see come about. And I don't imagine either that Trump, despite what he has said, would actually try to bring that kind of world about by trying to pull us out of Japan. So I don't see that as a real issue.
Yes, David.
David Satterwhite, an associate member of the club and member of the board. It's good to see you and hear you again, Professor Curtis. Two things briefly. One, you, unlike the United States, where we can more or less predict the next 4 years because we have a president for the next 4 years or longer, Japan has a parliamentary system, and your comments about Prime Minister Abe being in office at least through the next 4 years, maybe 5, with your half-century of knowing Japanese leaders personally and analyzing leadership in Japan, what are the other contenders that we might be looking at for the prime ministership of Japan if for any reason Prime Minister Abe stumbled and fell? Second, I ask with some trepidation because any discussion of North Korea provokes a sort of knee-jerk reaction. We're very close to a dangerous and heightened level of potential war on the Korean Peninsula. How would you see the possibility, now that we have a Trump presidency and we can't, as you said, predict any of his foreign policy, any chance of a paradigm shift that would ratchet us down rather than further up in tensions on the Korean Peninsula? Thank you.
Well, one reason why Abe is likely to be prime minister for another 4 years is that there's no one else in sight to replace him. And I'm at a loss, really, to come up with names of viable candidates to challenge him in 2018. Of course, it depends on what the state of the economy is and lots of other things. But the names that I mentioned, Mr. Ushiba, doesn't seem to me to be in a very strong position. Inada's stock has kind of gone down. Koizumi Shinjiro is much too young. Who's out there? I don't know, in all our advanced countries, we're facing this kind of leadership deficit. It's kind of weird that the Democratic Party could only come up with 2 people who even tried to be candidates for being president. The 60-year-old wife of a former president and a 72-year-old socialist who hadn't even been a member of the party. Nobody else even tried to run. So I think there's a, it's more than a Japan problem, but I don't see who else is out there. Now, of course, if he got ill again or something, he had to quit. Well, they'd find somebody. But, your guess is as good as mine who that might be. But I would say this. I think no matter who becomes the next, say he were to leave, no matter who became the next LDP president, I cannot imagine a significant shift in Japanese security policy strategy, which is to say that this policy, Japan's current foreign policy, is not the result of Mr. Abe being prime minister. It's the result of the Japanese response to the changes in the international system. And when Mr. Noda was prime minister and heading the DPP, what he was saying was not very different from what Mr. Abe has said since becoming prime minister. So I think the direction of change in Japanese foreign policy will remain pretty much the same, no matter who. North Korea, there are 2 international conferences among Asia specialists that are the most boring. There are 2. One is a conference on U.S.-Japan relations, in which you could write the scenario for what everybody's going to say before they ever meet, in terms of the sort of narrow bilateral relations. The other is North Korea, because you know what everybody's going to say about North Korea, and there's no good answer about North Korea. I think it's very simple with North Korea. The only way to try to deal with the North Korean issue is for the Chinese to agree with the Americans, the Japanese, and the South Koreans on a united front to try to pressure the North Koreans to agree to open negotiations about denuclearization. But as long as China's concern is more about the adverse consequences of a collapse of the regime than the consequences of it having nuclear weapons, then you're not going to have any progress. We cannot have a preemptive attack. I hope this message is getting through loud and clear to Mr. Trump. You cannot have a preemptive attack on North Korea's nuclear facilities or take out its leadership without destroying Seoul, at minimum, destroying Seoul. Maybe even Osaka or Tokyo, by a North Korean response. So, the cat is out of the bag, as we say, in terms of North Korea's nuclear capabilities. They have them. They're developing their missile capabilities. The most I think we can realistically look for is a way to engage the North Koreans in negotiations that would freeze their program. And that would involve giving them something. They're not going to do it for nothing. So giving them something in terms of easing up on sanctions or negotiations leading towards normalization of relations and a peace treaty. But we've been there. It's been 10 years. We've been there. We've tried the hard line, the soft line, and everything in between. And Obama's policy of so-called strategic patience towards North Korea was neither strategic, nor was it patient. It was simply indifference, and it didn't get us anywhere. So I'm, very pessimistic that anyone can come up with anyone except the Chinese can come up with a way to deal with it. So we should be, and you would hope that people in the Trump administration would be trying to engage the Chinese in a very concrete conversation of how do we deal with the North Koreans in a united way. And that involves sort of thinking out of the box about what Korea, in the event of regime change, would look like. What guarantees would be provided about American forces not moving up to beyond the 38th parallel, and so forth and so on. I don't believe there's much going on in the way of those kinds of discussions, but that's what's needed. Whether people in the Trump administration are there or whether they go back to, George Bush Jr. kind of talk of axis of evil and, we don't deal with people like that. We simply squeeze them. If that's where we're going, then that's just another thing to be very worried about, because it won't work, and it will create a a very dangerous possible reaction. So.
Okay, we have run out of time there, I'm afraid. My last task is to give Professor Curtis another one of those one-year memberships for the club. We hope to see you here again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Peter.